global warming. Global warming is everywhere. It's warming. The whole world is warming. Even the TV series. And well, there's been Congress. It's one of the most important around the world. Of course, the most important in Europe. Next Congress, where we had like I think Radio Cine's favorite scholar, who is Dennis Broe. Dennis, how are you? Welcome.
Okay, I'm okay. Great. Yep. Good. And so today, what I'm going to talk about is from a talk I gave in Oslo on the weekend at a
Yes.
conference whose subject was care and caring. And as you will see, there are in this talk a couple of instances, not of care, but of the lack thereof.
I have even the we had all your presentation, but care. It was in Oslo, isn't it? It was the
Yes.
title of the conference was care.
Right.
So we're going today to do something we have done until up to now with in Radio Cine, but you usually are able to do it, and we like you how you do it. That's you're going to do the presentation and going to be in the background, passing the slides. You tell me when to show it. So something that happened, and I know there was an audience, but it was for a little audience. Now it's available for our listeners and viewers. So if you want to, you're going to confirm me now. This is your first slide. Twin Apocalypses, isn't it?
Yes. So that will start out. That's the teaser, Twin Apocalypses.
Perfect.
Last week, the soot from the Canadian wildfires was so thick along the East Coast that in New York and Washington, school sessions were canceled and messengers compelled to keep working, resurrected N95 masks from the last apocalypse in order to breathe. Meanwhile, in Europe, the floods from the sabotage of the Russian-controlled dam in the Ukraine may result in 20,000 hectares of land used to grow grain in the breadbasket of the world, remaining infertile for 5 years. Well, that same act also endangered the cooling process in the Russian-controlled Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, the largest in Europe. Now the credits. Next slide. Yes, so the title is Apocalyptic TV and Global Warming. Don't worry, be glum. I'm Dennis Broe. Pilot. Frederick Jameson's famous dictum that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism has been taken up wholeheartedly by the makers of corporate television in numerous series stretching across different genres and now accounting for its own genre, post-apocalyptic TV. Broadcast, cable, and streaming TV, and of course numerous films have concocted a plethora of endings to the world as we know it, which have the effect of failing to challenge the climate apocalypse as the catastrophe calls for immediate action in the present to keep the worst from happening. In so doing, the makers of corporate TV, largely American, but then picked up across the globe using the American prototypes, have found a new way forward in the persistent refusal to challenge the fossil fuel industry. That is a more sophisticated approach to the now mostly discredited climate denial narrative initiated by that industry. For if the catastrophe is unavoidable, we may as well begin planning the post-apocalyptic future. In the industry, these are referred to as dystopian series, but that's similar to calling climate destruction climate change. It's a carbon neutral way of labeling the problem without discussing it. This paper highlights the shift from apocalyptic series, which focus on the moment of the end times of the Earth and might be politically more useful, to post-apocalyptic series, where the end point of destruction has already come and gone, and the series is about coping with the aftermath in the best possible way. Slide. That is, the genre, for the most part, as David Harvey utilizes these terms, borrowed from Marx's Grundrisse, presupposes the end as at this stage inevitable, and is instead about positing how to survive after the end, once the presupposition of end times is established. The material reasons for the preoccupation with apocalypse at this conjuncture are the destruction of the Earth, the escalating danger of nuclear war, and the decline of the West. all of which is accompanied by a resolute repression in the corporate media, which either refuses to engage or downplays the implications of any of these conditions. However, dialectically, this also allows for an opening. Whereas in series based in the present, political content is mostly abandoned or repressed, these series, once the idea that the end time is not nigh, but here, may allow a freedom for both pursuing a deep critique of the contemporary order and a positing of alternative orders. Slide. In season 11 of The Walking Dead, the originator and dean of this genre, the problems of the present resurface as the neoliberal perfect world of the Commonwealth conceals a vicious and violent inner core, a repressive deep state needed to maintain the surface air of gentility. The Last of Us presupposes at its outset a fascist government, the endpoint of today's neoliberal experiments, as the French no longer believing in Macron as a bulwark against fascism, since he's used undemocratic techniques himself, now turn to Le Pen. However, in the course of the cross-country travels of the two lead characters, the series posits the creation of a communal compound, which is the opposite of this order and which opposes it. Finally, the class antagonism in Snowpiercer indicates that the post-apocalyptic world cannot escape the problems of the present, perhaps negating or qualifying the effectiveness of this flight into fantasy, while also suggesting, in the most radical positing of the genre, that a world shorn of capitalists can negotiate its own resurrection. Slide. Oil I want is you. The best thing about the earth is if you poke holes in it, oil and gas comes out, a Republican US congressman. If you think of the often feminization of the earth, Mother Earth, etc., the statement promotes both ecocide and misogyny. In the wake of the increasing failure to confront climate catastrophe and to rein in the fossil fuel industry, as the next global conference on climate COP28 is being held in the oil-rich city of Dubai, chaired by the head of the Abu Dhabi National Company, and with calls on the Paris left bank to boycott the conference. Slide. Depictions of the end times have increased. At this year's Series Mania, the largest television festival in the world, held at Lille in France, apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic series had, along with Me Too female liberation series, become the dominant, accounting for 13% of the total of 55 series. These range from the apocalyptic tone of the endpoint of Western science and Lars von Trier's Return to the Kingdom, to South Korean high school teens training for an alien threat that hovers over their heads in Duty After School, to the Spanish series Apagon, where a solar tempest strikes the earth, slide, to The Fortress, where Norway in Trump style walls itself off from the world and then must confront a deadly virus, and finally to The Swarm, a global series financed by several European public television networks in which the ocean sets out to wreak its revenge on a humanity bent on destroying it. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has set the doomsday clock at 90 seconds to midnight as planetary destruction looms. This grim future reality, though, is belied by a most abundant present for oil and gas companies, whose profits have never been greater. Slide. Largely as a result of the energy crisis, because of the war in Ukraine, the profits of the 5 largest producers of oil and gas, Chevron, ExxonMobil, Shell, BP in total, were 195 billion in 2022, almost 120% more than the previous year, and the highest level in the industry's history, with the US President Biden accusing these companies of war profiteering. Only 5% of these profits went to developing clean energy, with the majority going, as Chevron claimed, to shareholders, investing, and paying down debt. In addition, the war has occasioned a return to the most dangerous and most polluting methods of extraction, including in the West, deep water drilling, and the return of coal. And across the world, new nuclear power plants announced in Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, as France threatens to bring 6 to 14 new plants online, irregardless of the nuclear waste these plants will generate. In the US, now become the largest supplier of natural gas, slide, that has meant a return and a reopening of the previously unprofitable industry of fracking in a new narrative, where this process, which destroys drinking water and leaks methane in a way comparable to coal mining, saved American democracy. The day the war began, the Bloomberg News Agency ran a story headlined, "Fracking, a Powerful Weapon Against Russia," trumpeting the return to an industry that had almost gone bankrupt. The carbon imprint of the replacement of Russian oil and natural gas with American fracked gas, with its increased transport distance, is 2 times greater than before. Add to that the imprint of American hydraulic fracking, and the carbon imprint is almost 3 times greater. In addition, the war has also seen the blowing up of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 Russian pipelines, slide, with the culprit still an object of surmise, but with much of the evidence, as marshaled by the U.S. Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, leaning toward the U.S. and Norway, oil producers who have been the major benefactors of the sabotage. The methane emitted from that cloud that passed across Europe was described as the highest release of methane gas ever on the planet. Since the onset of the war, Western governments have caved into the demands of an ever more dominant and omnipotent fossil fuel industry, with US President Biden having implemented all the policy requests of a secretive fossil fuel lobby group, as Bush, in a secret meeting never made public, signed on to his VP Cheney's Halliburton agenda, and as Trump more brazenly named the head of Exxon as his Secretary of State. Equally, European leaders met more than 100 times with the industry since the war began, while industry lobbyists at 2020's UN climate conference far outnumbered, quote, climate vulnerable African countries and indigenous communities. The effects of this onslaught slide have already appeared in the U.S. in rising coastal sea levels in the east, amid worse hurricanes and storms, Midwestern mega rains and droughts destroying crops and homes, and worsening and more destructive forest fires in the west. The apocalyptic effect by the end of this century, if this destruction is not halted, will be the drowning of island nations, the inundating of coastal areas from Ecuador to Brazil to the Netherlands, as well as huge swaths of South and Southeast Asia, and the potential extinction of major cities such as New York, Los Angeles, Vancouver, London, Mumbai, and Shanghai. Slide. All this is linked to the failure to confront the fossil fuel industry. As Naomi Klein says, we have not done the things that are necessary to lower emissions because those things fundamentally conflict with deregulated capitalism. The actions that would give us the best chance of averting catastrophe threaten an elite minority that has a stranglehold over our economy, our political process, and most of our major media outlets. All of this, in terms of the apocalyptic imagination, leads to, as she says, the acute and painful realization that our leaders are not looking after us. We are not cared for at the level of our very survival. Other apocalypses, 2 other forms of destruction, ever more on the horizon, and which also are essentially going largely undiscussed and unheeded, are the renewed threat of nuclear war in the face of the ever escalating war in Ukraine, and what I will call, after Paul Gilroy, imperial malaise, the decline of the West, which is being hastened by the division of the West and the rise and resistance of the rest of the world, prompted also by the war. Slide. With Russia having announced the stationing of nuclear weapons in nearby Belarus, and with the NATO countries continuing the path of escalation, the British supplying depleted uranium weapons, which will leave radiation traces on both the Ukrainian users and the Russian targets, while destroying swaths of the environment, the Germans sending Leopard tanks east in an ominous suggestion of World War II, and with Poland now demanding to be armed with U.S. nuclear weapons. And as the U.S. Secretary of State declares that the U.S. will support no peace talks and will not end the war, the threat of a full-scale nuclear war increases daily. This threat, mostly unacknowledged in the corporate press, also feeds the feeling of hopelessness and a sense the world may be coming to an end. The failure of the West, led by the U.S., to enlist the rest of the world in its campaign against Russia, with fully 83% of the world refusing to go along with U.S. sanctions, has hastened an already accelerating decline as the center of economic activity shifts eastward to Asia. The results have been a cumulative apocalypse which has seen income disparity worsen to the point where the creators of these television series, the Hollywood writers, claim as a primary reason for their strike that they can no longer support themselves on their salaries, while profits within the streaming industry soar. That is, they can no longer live in the town, Los Angeles, that they created. In France, slide, inflation from price gouging and the war, the raising of the retirement age, and the canceling of job security is expressed in a bit of graffiti on the left bank that simply states, Grève ou crève, strike or die. Finally, there is the crisis of the drug epidemic as a way of coping with this destruction that has passed from heroin to Purdue Pharma distributed Oxycontin to fentanyl, 7 times more potent and addictive than heroin. All three discovered and originally manufactured in big pharma laboratories, making the streets of Los Angeles unsafe. Slide. It's no wonder that one of the contemporary Hollywood apocalyptic series, From, has everyone locked in their homes at night with living dead, flesh eating zombies ready to devour anyone who lets their guard down and goes outside. The full weight of these various apocalypses is never registered in the continuing onslaught of corporate media, where we are told that despite it all, the system is coping, doing its best, and is still the hope for humanity. The cognitive dissonance and distance between what is said and what the collective unconscious knows to be true, but which must remain unsaid, is also responsible for the dominance of the terrifying images of post-apocalyptic television. How can it be, for example, that a country which holds itself up as a shining beacon to the world, sometimes called the indispensable nation, supplies B-16 bombers to Ukraine at $550 million per plane, but forces its homeless in Los Angeles, epicenter of a national housing crisis, to sleep at night on public buses? From disaster to dystopia to post-apocalypse. It's worth recalling that the genre that culminates in the present in post-apocalyptic television began in literature as one describing utopia, with Thomas More setting its prototype in the book by the same name, and its presiding theorist being Ernst Bloch, slide, whose 3-volume archaeology of the principle of hope was written in the darkest days of World War II. Such a text in which political institutions, social norms, economic systems, and ways of life are superior to the present could serve to call attention to the injustices and oppressions of the present. With Bloch comes the idea that imagination is forward directed, a call to action. Thus, as Fredric Jameson says, the waning of the utopian idea is a fundamental historical and political symptom. The particular parallel trajectory in terms of affect regarding climate change parallels changes in this genre. In the 70s, as fossil fuel companies were commissioning, then suppressing studies that showed that their continued drilling could cause planetary destruction, came the disaster films. Slide. Limited but horrible images of natural or human-constructed devastation, including Earthquake, the Poseidon Adventure dealing with a tsunami, and the Towering Inferno, apocalypse, but in a single building, with lots of stars, mostly A-list, but some B-list. As the consciousness of this potential devastation began to grow, public opinion went through first a questioning and then a period of greenwashing, where it appeared technical solutions within global capitalism could work. In this era, roughly the 1990s to the early 2000s, the apocalyptic impulse tended to decrease, with the fear allayed, and with occasional dystopic series where the world, a la 9/11, is threatened, but where those fleeing the Earth in, say, Battlestar Galactica, still retain the image of an abundant Earth in which to return. However, with the dawning in the last decade of the full weight of climate catastrophe, the rapid acceleration of these crises over even the last year, and the tendency toward throwing up one's hands and deciding there's nothing to be done but submit passively, apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic series, many of which simply see the end as inevitable, have increased in tempo as the apocalyptic imaginary has also penetrated other genres. Slide. Thus, in these series, there are several endings of the world where the series is concerned with the adaptive strategies of those who survive, with little left to them but their own resourcefulness. The Leftovers, Jericho, The Rain, War of the Worlds, Silo. Capitalism and its part in global war, climate destruction, and a relentlessly unequal economy is barely cited as culpable in this situation. The genre itself is a combination of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, with the latter now coming to dominate. The post-apocalyptic imagination is also projected into the past in AT&T HBO's Game of Thrones and Throne of the Dragon, which languishes in a primitive dog-eat-dog world that could be read as post-neoliberal, where all the boundaries and protections of the state have been overturned, and in the near future, as the splitting of an employee's consciousness between work and leisure in Apple's Severance, in effect, denies the real-world struggle of Apple workers to organize in a series that is not green, but work-washing. In these series, what was once an archaeology of hope is transmuted into an archaeology of despair, with the affect mobilized being a latter stage of what Jameson identifies as the chief postmodern emotion, irony, in the form of Elvis Costello's I used to be disgusted, but now I try to be amused, where what hurts is transformed into what smirks. Being above the fray and superior to it short circuits the stage of activism. But increasingly, the smirk, the attitude du jour of some academics, cannot conceal the hurt. An exception to these late stage post apocalyptic series is The Swarm slide. Instead, an apocalyptic series which takes place in the near present as the ocean is mobilizing its defense, that is, at the onset rather than after the apocalypse, and which can be read as a call to action before the oceans are destroyed from the heart of what still remains of European social democracy, financed by public television stations in France, Italy, Austria, and Switzerland, as well as private streamers in Scandinavia and Japan. These series are replete with sentiments echoing this resignation from The Last of Us's timid claim, disavowing collective action, that as long as there's one person worth saving, it's possible to live a fulfilling life. Slide. And Station 11's reckoning by the actress who survives a Holocaust and finds a memoir of the time before that I don't care that the world was ending because it was the world. These views are endorsed in the press as the New York Times lead television reviewer James Poniewozik described the latter series glibly as the most uplifting show about life at the end of the world you are likely to see. The critic praises Station 11 as a series that celebrates humanity's drive to create, with this neoliberal mumbo jumbo about the indomitability of the human spirit, concealing the fact that creation here is refashioned as a device not to save humanity, but to divert it. Poniewozik concludes that this show is for you if you want catharsis and a surprising laugh, with the implication being that if you're concerned with actually changing the world or forestalling the disaster, this is not a show for you. Apocalyptic alternatives. Slide. The Walking Dead in its critique of the neoliberal order. If we strip away the abundance and expansionism of the liberal capitalist order, we find waiting beneath the disguise of peaceful competition and meritocratic incentive the cruelty and oppression to which modern liberalism has become oblivious. Oddly, this statement could be the tagline for season 11, the final season of The Walking Dead. In it, the survivors take on their most deceptive opponent, the Commonwealth, a seemingly utopian community blessed with abundance and locked behind sturdy gates that walls its residents off from both the zombies and the viciousness of the bands that contend with them. Slide. The kingdom is ruled over by Pamela Milton and her family. The dynasty is headed by this blonde aging leader with physical similarity to Hillary Clinton, whose words proclaim that she only wants what is best for her people. Above ground, the mood is calm and tranquil, but below ground are the prisons for those who resist the Commonwealth's abundance. Pamela tells an underling, not that it isn't, but it can't feel like a police state. And perhaps a nod to the patrolling in the contemporary US of Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. Slide. The Walking Dead survivors find, though, that beneath the utopian veneer of the new world lurks the same old class distinctions, as two of the survivors are sent to a labor camp being told that their work, quote, will benefit those better than you. Slide. While Pamela's son, a little Hunter Biden, Eric Trump, betrays the truth of the place. The reality, he says, is the poor stay poor so the rich can do whatever we want. All of which reminds us of Clinton's characterization of the working class as deplorables in the 2016 election. The foreign policy of the Commonwealth, slide, is one of dominance, not benevolence, as its security forces attempt to turn the other camps outside their purview into outposts of or labor camps operating for the good of the Commonwealth. Here reminding us of Clinton's destroying Libya, the oil-rich African country with the most developed healthcare system and the highest literacy, and then boasting about it. Anecdote. The weekend before the bombs started to fall, the Financial Times ran a detailed map of where oil was drilled, processed, and shipped in Libya to remind NATO to bomb schools and hospitals, but to take care to leave the oil routes alone. Finally, slide. Milton reveals her true self as she exiles her people outside the gates of the Commonwealth as the zombies approach to save a small cohort of her and her associates. The final shot of her after her rule is overturned in prison is a shot which compares her though she still has an aura of reasonableness, to the imprisoning of the most vicious monster the survivors had faced, Negan, after his more openly brutal order was defeated. The Last of Us is communal alternatives. More problematic is another zombie apocalypse, that of The Last of Us, adapted from the game, with its showrunner Craig Mazin having visualized the real apocalypse of Chernobyl. The series, after it quickly jumps 20 years beyond the onset of the virus or fungus, posits first in the north in Boston Fedra, a broken down police state, after a mycologist has proposed as a solution, since there is no vaccine, to bomb everyone in the city. Joel, the Mandalorian's Pedro Pascal, and the teenage Ellie, Game of Thrones' Bella Ramsey, then go on a cross-country tour to find a group of scientists, since Ellie, who survived a bite, may hold the cure. On the tour, they encounter in St. Louis populist fascists who hunt their African-American guide, who does explain to them that their viciousness is the product of the police state government's torturing and killing people for 20 years, in an admission that the brutality of these Trump-like survivors is partly a factor of them being brutalized by a system that for the last 50 years in the US has continually attacked their wages and lifestyle. Finally, Joel and Ellie find an alternative in Wyoming, in a collective where leaders are democratically elected and ownership is shared. It's here, uh, slide, it's here that they are offered hope, a chance, as Joel's brother says, to figure out what they want to do with their lives. But this actual utopia is simply a resting spot they might hope to return to, because they must press on to get Ellie to a hospital where she can be examined, which proves again to be part of a nightmare of modern science where curing and killing are synonymous. Slide. Snowpiercer and the return of the utopian impulse. It will then turn out that the world has long dreamt of that at which it had only to have a clear idea to possess it really. Karl Marx in 1843. The most class-conscious apocalyptic series, and ultimately the most hopeful, is Bong Joon-ho's adaptation of his film of the same name. Bong Joon-ho is the most class-conscious director working in film and television today, and he's currently adapting his Academy Award-winning film Parasite for television. The train in Snowpiercer, the survivors of a nuclear winter cling to as it circles the earth is, as they describe it, a fortress to class, with the tailies at the back in cramped quarters called unticketed passengers to stress their illegitimacy, while the ultra-rich in the front of the train enjoy fine dining. Slide. The revolution with the tailies, led by stalwart leader Andre Layton, prevails in season 1, but is beaten back in season 2, slide, by the return of the train's engineer and entrepreneur founder, Mr. Wilford, a Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk type, whose contempt for equality drips from every corner of his mouth onto his fur coat. Season 3 ends in a truly startling moment. Mr. Wilford has lost control of the train, is imprisoned, but attempts to regain power when the train's original leader, Melanie Cavill, and Layton disagree on how to proceed over the possibility that there may be a spot on the earth warm enough to sustain life. The slide. The traditional method of control, divide and conquer, though, does not prevail, as Melanie and Layton agree to disagree on what path to follow, but come together to oppose the capitalist retaking the train. He is offloaded with enough supplies to survive, but has lost his place in this now more equal class structure. The two factions then come to a mutual agreement where each takes a principled stand, which sees them dividing the train. The point is clear, though. With the capitalists gone, they are then able to hash out compromise that has each doing what they think is best for the train and for what is left of humanity as a whole. The final lesson of Snowpiercer is that the world shorn of its capitalist billionaires, if it is, its various and diverse peoples will find compromises that can yet save humanity. So, working from the presupposition that the world has ended, this series posits a way forward that begins with the overthrow of the controlling leader who puts his own impulses and interests ahead of everyone else on the train and the planet. Slide. The reward for this bold proclamation, Warner Brothers, or now Warner Brothers Discovery, still ruled by the very conservative Texas company AT&T, refused to air the final season, shot and ready to go on TNT. The company preferred a tax write-off to airing a show whose season is about how groups cooperate to learn how to retake the planet. It's a grim scenario, but we're in a grim place right now.
Thank you, Dennis. I was muted to now disturb you. At the scenario in any case.
So yes, I forgot to say the end. Although
Yeah,
that's although that sounds pretty apocalyptic already.
yeah. It was like I think, and well, we are in reverse order. I'm fixing it now. But movie westerns used to end with the end in the classic times, the end day. But well, now it's not like we needed the roll credits in any way. It's there are a lot of things that come from your talk and from your analysis, and well, lots of questions to think about it, and I think even to read it when you publish it. But with the last one, I'm wondering with the AT&T and how these series are created. These are usually big budget series, but behind them there are creators, there are persons with some sensibility. How do they balance the need for the money for to create this series with their artistic freedom, with the critique to the system that you've described?
Yeah, it's a good question, especially in this case. So, for 3 seasons, Bong Joon-ho, who had some creative cachet since he won the Academy Award with
Yeah.
Parasite, was
Yes, you
allowed
could
to do,
imagine he can do anything, but
yes,
no.
he could do anything, was allowed to create the series and kind of create a series that really did put class struggle in the foreground. Okay,
Mhm.
but then economics intervened. Warner Brothers has lost a lot of money, or so it claims. Certainly, that's what it claims to the writers, who they won't pay. Uh, but
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
but so therefore, they are writing things down, just like with the African American lead in Batgirl. They chose with this series already shot, already in the can, and ready to be shown on TNT. They chose the tax write-off instead because they felt like, well, we're gonna have to pay the publicity to advertise this series, and at this moment, we'll just take the write-off. And that probably had something to do also with what it's saying, which is not favorable to them. So in the end, for 3 seasons, the auteur trumped the industry. In the end, the industry trumped the auteur, and Snowpiercer finds itself without a home. They thought they would go to for this 4th season that's already shot and paid for. They thought they
Mhm.
would go to Netflix, but Netflix refused, and so they're still shopping it. And it I don't know. So far, it's been a long time they've been shopping it, and they haven't found a home. So it is
Oh,
possible they may not. So we're hoping they will, but we don't know.
oh, it's incredible. We already shot that you can see it, and wow, that's some things that
There's something else I need to add to that.
sure,
Supposedly in the background, because they divorced themselves, a
yeah,
name from Warner Brothers Discovery, AT&T, extremely conservative company from Texas, still owns 71% of the stock, which means they can make majority decisions in terms of what
absolutely.
happened with Warner Brothers Discovery. As Let me just expound a little bit more on what the kinds of odious things Warner Brothers Discovery is doing. First of all, hastened by the strike, and their merger with Discovery, they're trying to pollute the airwaves with reality TV. Of course, it's much cheaper.
Mhm.
They
Yeah.
also, the first thing they tried to do, though, was to delete and cut the program for their screenwriters, which was sort of Warner Brothers of the future. It was this and Disney are the main programs for screenwriters.
Yeah.
There was a huge hue and cry, and they eventually had to stop that. But just a couple of weeks ago, they got caught trying to pull the credits off of their writers, producers, and directors. They wanted to lump them all together in one thing just called creators. So that's some of the shenanigans Warner Brothers or Warner
Wow.
Discovery has been pulling. And
Well,
add to that the shenanigan of not broadcasting Snowpiercer for season 4.
yeah, that's well, it's incredible the different stories and anecdotes, that show how this works.
I'll
There's
just say
another thing.
that in the industry, they were they've been having trouble for a long time. Remember, I don't know if you remember, but they really got everyone angry during COVID when they said that no Warner Brothers film would be released in the theaters. They would all go to they would all be streaming first. That's when people in the industry started calling them former brothers. You know, so anyway,
Yeah, yeah,
it's continuation.
yeah. They, of course, their work is not. I think it's not broadcasting, not showing films, not showing art. Their work is earning money, just however it goes. And
And at this moment, that means cutting back. Of course,
yeah,
cutting back also on people in the company as they're all doing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Um, One thing.
Actually, that's a sort of contradiction because as the content becomes worse, kind of more low level, they see themselves and they present themselves, each of these major streamers, as having something for everyone. When in fact, they call this bottom of the barrel stuff something for everyone.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
if you're
that
looking at the bottom of the barrel, there's something for you there.
yeah. It's the concept they have. I work something with diversity. I wonder about the concept that Netflix has about diversity. For instance, Netflix, they say, "Oh, we are a very diverse company. We include people from every country." But yes, but with your own point of view. You don't you produce with your own point of view and with the I think mainly focus on an American way of producing, and
For
not
sure.
you don't broaden your view to everywhere, to the whole world. No, no, it's
Well,
diverse my way.
sort of Netflix in Spain, but I'll say this: there was a great paper at this conference, and this woman went and interviewed all these creators about Netflix.
Uh huh.
Because Netflix used to be the company that welcomed creators, where you could do what you want, a company that didn't impose anything on you, right?
Yeah.
So one of them started talking about, and another one validated this idea that the most important thing for Netflix is the first 15 minutes of a series, because that's by
Oh.
the algorithm when
Uh,
people will either continue or tune out.
mm-hmm.
So, it's important is
Yeah.
the first most important is the first 2 minutes, then the first 5 minutes, then the first 15 minutes.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And I think I've got to wind up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's well. That's how they see their
Yes,
profits.
just one other thing, because Netflix, then I'll go, because Netflix says that, they're really into local series, which kind of contradicts what you're saying. So if they're really into
Yeah.
local series and local production, well, how do they control that local production? Because of course we all know they're also into global production. They claim that local production is the way to do global production because that's how people get interested. Well, my
Mhm.
theory is that they control it through genre. In other words, you can
Yeah.
have genre allows you to sort of dictate that it follows the genre, and then within following the genre you can have local flavor, and that's what they mean by local
Mhm.
flavor.
Yeah, absolutely. Now in Canada, they're creating, but it's how it's applied. It's just passed a bill about Canadian content in Netflix, and there's also some controversy about Google and what Google shows in Canada and all
Yes.
the rest of the world.
Yep.
Regarding global warming, I had also a question for you. Something that worries me, that I don't know. This is from the journalistic perspective, but I wanted to have your view about it. Uh, Regarding, for instance, the wildfires recently, we had some 2 or 3 days now in Toronto, where I'm living at currently, and well, it was bad, but nothing I haven't seen in Spain when there were like Saharan winds or whatever. But and well, it was the image you've shown of New York. It was very shocking. There were shocking images, but aren't we every time something happens blaming global warming, and that may be the excuse for these big companies to take the blame of it exclusively to one thing. And I'm wondering about wildfires. They have some causes, and it's established some of them are global warming, more thunderstorms, but you go deeper, and sometimes there are people who are benefited from it, and we always say global warming, global warming. Aren't we like too focused on it, and we should have a broader image? Or what's
Well,
your view
I
about it?
think we're too focused on the broader question. We're not focused enough on the narrow question, which is the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah.
That's what's causing. That's what it's in the media. In the immediate is causing global warming, and
Hmm.
it's got to stop. But it's not. But that's going to be a huge fight because the fossil fuel industry has never made more profits, as I said, and it's
Yes.
going to hold on to what it's doing to the environment. And it. This is another thing, with Elon Musk and with the lith. This, we're maybe passing out of the age of petrol or oil, and we're moving to the age of lithium.
Hmm.
And the fossil fuel industry indeed may be left behind. So they are clinging to what's left, and they don't care what they do to the planet as long as they clean up. And that,
Hmm.
I think, is really the crucial question that we can't lose sight of.
Yeah. Yeah. The graphic, I've gone through the slide of the profits that you show. It's
Yeah,
well, it's a lot of money, a lot of money. We couldn't
it's
even
a lot of
imagine
money.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Antonio,
Thank you,
and
Dennis.
thanks for some great questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting and really appreciate it. It's
Okay.
now recorded. See you next
Okay.
time.
Okay. See you next time. Thanks.
Now
Okay.
the end. The end. Bye.
The end.